an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Evolve, chapters 15 and 16. In these chapters, we find out what humanity is. And it's like really rude. I am offended. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Okay, so thank you, first of all, Heather, for commissioning this episode and for being here in the chat. So, guys, this was really startling and didn't even occur to me. So, props, because this is an interesting idea. And it is honestly the kind of idea that I think, like, it feels like it came from a conspiracy theory board, like from some forum that popped out of like Ancient Aliens fandom kind of thing. Does that make sense? And even though it feels like one of those like ridiculous conspiracy theories, because of the way it's executed, it doesn't feel ridiculous, which is very tricky to do. I mean, I guess I could see it feeling ridiculous if you just give the broad strokes of the story here. Because I was telling Owen about the book series, and when I said something like, oh, and it turns out that these two guys are aliens, and he was like, all right, wait, hold up. And I was like, no, like, it works. But what it turns out we are is Incarna who haven't awakened yet. We're like the savages of the Incarna race that are unevolved, that they put on a planet that was almost impossible to find, so that they would have a backup population to continue on after they died if they were obliterated in this war that they're in. So the Incarna that are living among us like see us as like infants. We're of the same race, so there's, I think, probably a bit of an affection in it, but it feels very like patronizing in a way. Does that make sense? And honestly, I really like this idea because it makes everything else fall into place. It works really well for what it turns out is going on with Jordan and why she becomes important. But I just personally am offended at the idea of like, oh yeah, you're like the Stone Age version of us. And you kind of are serving as our backup battery, essentially. It also turns out, later on, we find out like Incarna's lives are so long normally. And our lives were purposefully shortened, he thinks. Or is it maybe, I think it might not be Spears that thinks that. I think it's Lyndon who thinks that. And it's sort of up for debate why. Because it seems like maybe having a shorter lifespan increases the urgency of reproduction. So that might have been like a targeted thing that they were trying to do. But that was interesting to me, the idea of having like shorter lifespans, making people reproduce more. I never really stopped to think about something like that, but it makes sense, I guess, if you're not going to be around in just several decades from when you've had kids. Like, let's say you've got an additional 5 decades after you have children. And that's, we're going with like dying around 75, 80 years old. Which is pretty young, actually, but we'll say that. It makes sense that you would want to have kids fairly early on, especially the way that our like reproductive systems are set up. They shut down for business eventually. Well, women's do. And there's also the fact that like there's just that weird instinct that humans have where we want to like live on, and while we know we can't, having a family is like a way of doing that. And so you could just watch your legacy develop before your eyes and watch them have children. And that would feel more like you are grasping for something. If your life is so much shorter, it will feel that much more precious, and you'll be more interested in creating that sort of like, you know, but Heather says, we see it in the animal world all the time. Rats and rabbits, for example, don't live long and produce tons of babies, but elephants and whales live a long time and don't produce many babies. I guess that makes sense too for like just the sheer overpopulation that could happen. If you live a long time and you're having tons of babies, then there's just going to be too goddamn many of you, like shortly, you know? But yeah, I just thinking about like the human reaction to the lifespans that we have. If you have a lot of time in front of you, I mean, so many people wind up only having children because they're worried that they're not going to be able to eventually. You know, I know this is something that women struggle with particularly because ours are the reproductive systems that eventually shut down. And it's tough because like in the age that we now live in, I think a lot, and I'm talking about cis women, but cis women are learning how to be outside of relationships in a way that we have never been allowed to be in previous centuries. And because of that, a lot of us are finding that we enjoy our own lives and don't feel the urge to have children for a while. And it's tough when you're older because the risks of complications can go up. I know, like, my mother, she got pregnant when she was, I think, like 47. And it was like a 30% chance that she was going to be able to have a healthy child. And the risk to her was significant as well. It wasn't just that like, oh, the baby is not going to be okay. It was that she might not be okay. And she wound up terminating the pregnancy because she was so, you know, it was so, makes me so angry, guys. She terminated the pregnancy because of the risk, and her insurance refused to cover it. So she had to pay $2,000 for this abortion because her insurance refused, even though her like life was in danger. So anyway, that's the US. But it's just an interesting concept. Like, if we had unlimited time, how many women would choose to have children far later in life? In my opinion, for me, I am 37, and I feel like I have barely gotten to live anything. I feel like I've done almost nothing. Having a kid right now, like, are you kidding? I'm just getting rolling. Why would I do that? And it's just wild to me that there are women who are having kids long before me. And I'm not saying that your life ends, but you obviously are going to have to like put things off for a while. A kid is a full-time fucking job. And I'm certainly not interested in having children. But if I were able to have them when I was like 60 and it would be fine, I might be considering it more than I am now. I just know that within the next 10 years, it's absolutely not going to be of interest to me. So it's just off the table because of that. And if I had more time, maybe it wouldn't be. This is also part of why like Owen and I have discussed fostering eventually, because maybe it doesn't have to be my kid, and I could still like have a sort of experience and not have to be the one that goes through labor and everything. And I can do it when I'm older. And when I have more resources as well, because that is also hugely helpful. Heather says, for sure, I'm a great auntie, but I never regret not having kids of my own. Yes, same. It's truly like the kind of thing that I remember as a kid thinking I didn't see the appeal. And my mother, of course, well, you'll change your mind. Or she said something like, I don't even think she said you'll change your mind. She said something like, it changes when it's your kid. Which implies basically like if you get knocked up by accident, don't worry, eventually you'll like it, which is sort of a weird vibe, probably stemming from first person experience. But I always sort of expected to like have a shift because so many people seem so certain, and it just never happened. And I think a lot of that too, again, is due to the fact that our economy is in the tank, and our millennials have been ripped off and nobody has jobs that pay anything. There's no stability of any kind. What motivates somebody to have children when they can't even like take care of themselves in any significant way? Not to say that some people aren't still out there having kids, and God bless them, but it's just, for me, that was also a major factor. If I were more comfortable, maybe, but I'm not. So there it is. Anyway, so this chapter 15 opens with Dr. Spears coming in to have his little presentation that he makes to the Senate. And I think that if he heard me say his little presentation, he would be so mad. He is such a fucking drama queen. Holy shit. We find out later when we are with Dr. Linden. Is Linden his first name? Or is it Dr. Linden? I can't remember. That he was like Thoth and Apollo to people of humanity in the past. Guys, can you imagine being like a sort of elevated, and I'm using that word in quotes because obviously I don't subscribe to the idea of the elevation the way that Spears does. He like seems to genuinely think he's better than these people, and he's worse. He just is. But can you imagine allowing the people around you to believe that you're a god, and watch them put, not only do they worship you, but they immortalize their worship of you in statuary and story, all kinds of artwork. I am disgusted. Truly. I already didn't like this guy, but there was something about finding out about this in particular that I was just like, oh my God. It's just, there's something really pathetic about it. You know what I mean? I feel like the pathos comes from you, and this might actually reveal a little bit more about me than it does about him, but I have often felt like getting compliments doesn't do a lot for me a lot of the time, due to the fact that I hold most of humanity in contempt. And therefore, a compliment coming from a stranger of a population that I, in general, do not respect is a compliment that I don't trust because I think it comes from a place of foolishness. Right? Of course you like my outfit. You have no taste. That kind of thing. My outfit's garbage, but you're just too tasteless to realize that kind of thing. Which is simultaneously extremely narcissistic on my part. Of being like, you just have bad judgment. I don't. So I don't trust you. But it also undercuts everything that I do all the time. Because I don't want to believe anything anybody says to me because I don't trust them. And so nothing good about what people say to me really sinks in because I don't believe it. Does that make sense? There's 5 people in my life that if they gave me a compliment, I would buy it and really be like, oh, wow, thank you. But a lot of and when I say that, when listeners tell me that they love the show, it's different, especially when it comes from a listener that I've gotten to know. You know what I mean? I'm talking about sort of an in-person thing or random comments that you get from people, in comment sections or out, in the world. And so for me, the idea of, we know how much he holds humanity in contempt. Why does their worship mean anything if you don't think they have any like capabilities at all. It feels so empty to me. It's like me being worshipped by a bunch of squirrels. You know, it's not that squirrels aren't adorable, but they're squirrels, man. They don't know. They just worship me because I feed them birdseed. And that's all it takes, because they're fucking squirrels. So their worship doesn't mean anything, because it could be got by anybody who has a fucking bag of birdseed. It's easy. It's not about me. It's about what I have. And that's different. And for Spears, that just doesn't seem to be a problem. He doesn't care that it's not about him. Because to him, it still is about him. And that's what I think the problem is for me that I'm not getting. Is it's so obviously due to where he was born, an accident of his birth. And yet, he's like weirdly taking credit for it in a way that is absolutely unfair and missing the point in a major way. And it makes me think of like when we're in Lyndon's head later, he says something to himself. I'm trying to remember exactly the way that he phrased it, but that he, you know, he was never one to go for that. So he didn't do the same kinds of approaches in trying to make himself godlike that Dr. Spears did, but that, you know, we know he could have if he wanted to. He just didn't like it. And I can't help but wonder how much more quickly they would have like fallen out of friendship with one another if Lyndon had had the same bent of attempting to be worshipped that Spears does. Because Spears, I feel like, is just the kind of person who's not going to take competition well. He doesn't want to share the spotlight. He doesn't want to be the guy like who's one of the most powerful beings. He wants to be the most powerful being. And I just think it's sort of luck that he was here with somebody who just had no interest in that. Because otherwise the shit could have gone really differently. Heather says, because deep down he holds himself in even deeper contempt. This is what the question is, because I can't tell if that's true or not. Like, it's so hard for me to gauge what he genuinely thinks of himself, because it's all caught up with his enjoyment of watching people bow and scrape to him, his enjoyment of being able to read what their emotional reactions are so he can feel like he's sort of reading their minds and that they can't hide anything from him. And there's also the aspect too of like the fact that he is attempting to subjugate a race after having been subjugated. And Lyndon just doesn't understand wanting to do the same thing to a population after it was done to you. And this is something that comes up a lot in all kinds of spaces of marginalized people. You will begin to see this weird thing where you split into two groups. And this, I'm telling you, there are so many groups in which this is applicable. You take a marginalized group, and within that group, you will have two camps. You will have the ones who usually suffer the most aggressive marginalization. They are particularly targeted for whatever reason. And then you have the ones that are, make no mistake, also targeted, but have a type of privilege that manages to shield them from some things. And you will start to see that camp begin to lord it over the other camp. And not all of them, but it will be this weird recreation of the greater macro effect of that oppression, just on a much smaller scale. I might have mentioned this before, but the podcast, The Black Guy Who Tips, he tweeted something a while back, which was, black men are the white men of the black community. And he said black men are the white people of the black community, actually, I think is what he said. Essentially saying that, like, black men are targeted for sure, But they are also out here weaponizing like their masculinity against black women and wanting to be in a position of power over black women and, if they can, white women as well, because they are attempting to take the place of the oppressors that they are fighting against. They're not fighting the oppression. They're fighting the oppressors because they resent being subjugated, but not because they resent the concept of subjugation, which, you know, and this can happen in the gay community. People who are cis can be really, really bigoted against people who are not. And there's this whole thing with like passing and that being rewarded in so many ways. It's just every kind of community you can find this. We as a race, human beings, we have an impulse to feel better than somebody around us. There's just this built-in thing, this weird competitive nature, and it will out in whatever way. We will find a way to compare ourselves and make ourselves feel like we are somehow better than those around us. And it's just wild, the shit that we will come up with to make ourselves think we're better. It's just truly, again, pitiful. So that's kind of what I'm feeling from Dr. Spears, is that he doesn't, like, Lyndon's over here like, this oppression is bad. And Spears is like, this oppression of us is bad. I don't like being oppressed. That's the difference. Lyndon feels the concept of it is no good. We need to do away with this. And Dr. Spears has no problem with the concept of it. He understands it. He just has a problem with his placement in the hierarchy. That's his issue. And I guess that's what we're dealing with here. So this whole presentation that he makes to the Senate is laced with his contempt for them, his constant like manipulation of everybody's reactions because he can feel their immediate response to various things he's saying, and his reflecting on the people that he's already sort of gotten on his side. There's a lot of people in the audience who he has like already made deals with. It's unclear in some ways what the deals actually are. You just get the impression in a lot of cases that it's simply money, but I feel like in a few it sounded like something more, and I'm not sure what that is. We may not find out, you know, and that's fine. I'm not mad at that, but I am a little bit curious. Like, if it isn't just bribes straight up, how is another thing, like, what is another thing he has to offer? So of course he gets when he gets up there, he's essentially like, it turns out that awakened beings, we were wondering if it was a mutation or if it was evolution. I have been able to guarantee that it is actually evolution. And evolution is something that is normally at random and can just kind of throw you for a loop. You don't get to control it. But now that we have found out that this is evolution, I have figured out a way to control it, and we can get out ahead of this thing and make it into whatever we want. And he's presenting this as basically, I have this information. He doesn't say, it's implied, but he doesn't say, this information could get out and go to somebody else. There's like a vibe more of, well, it is more like it could get out, but I think the suggestion underneath it all is, if you guys don't want to work with me, a lot of countries would be willing, and they would pay, and it would be to your benefit to be the first, because you don't want to be on the tail end of picking up on something that is this significant. Essentially talks about how it could turn into like another Cold War, but with much higher stakes. And there are some people who are pushing back against this. There's one woman who's like, have you figured out a way to stop the evolution? Which truly is, that's it in a nutshell, isn't it? There are people who like forward movement of any kind, they would just rather not. Even if it's for the good, even if it's a natural progression, because we are beings that change and try to evolve and grow, there are some people who just don't want that because they don't know what that's going to mean and they don't like it. And that's all there is to it. And it's just like so short-sighted and stupid. And he essentially is like, that's what he says to her is like, okay, even if I could figure out how to do that, which I have not figured out, by the way, but if I could, who would agree to being like given a genetic blocker? How do you think that would go? And if we did that to our people and another country didn't, guess what happens? And he just really manages to like zero in on the fear factor for these people. And it's effective because fear is always effective. Anytime you decide to be like, well, but these other people are doing it, and what would that mean for us? That's pretty much a fucking wrap, man. That's it. That's all you got to say. So, yeah, he is essentially like told, okay, well, we'll get back to you and let you know, but we have to like draft legislation about this and everything. Meanwhile, what he is thinking to himself is that I know what I'm going to do is I'm going to get them to agree to this because I need the money. He has billions of dollars, but the scale at which he is attempting to work, it doesn't even come close to what he's going to need. So he's attempting to tap into government funds so that he can build himself an army. And he thinks to himself something about how I can use the same conditioning like that we used on our people, which is truly, again, just one of those like, I'm not going to look at the fact that the oppression that I fled from is something that I'm planning to actively use and model my regime on. It's just truly gross. And I don't want to know what his version of conditioning would look like. I have to assume that it's fucking horrifying. I've got this vibe in my head. It's like a total invention. And we haven't gotten there yet, reading A Song of Ice and Fire with Rashawn. But when Daenerys goes shopping for Unsullied, you find out how they train the Unsullied. And it's like so much worse than what you think. And it's truly just so awful. And that's the kind of thing that I'm picturing with these people. And it might not be that sort of... With the Unsullied, it feels really... what's the word I want? I'm wanting to say like earthy, but that's not quite right. It feels really like physically brutal in a way that's more what he would consider savage. And I'm sure that his people were able to find a cleaner, more palatable looking way to deal with it. But I'm sure in effect, it's the same kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? It's like when we're horrified that somebody is being tortured with like things that draw blood, but then we can waterboard, and because there's no blood drawn, we act like it's not as bad, and it's really actually as bad. It's just bloodless, and that's all we see, and so we feel like it's somehow more civilized when it's... Is it though? So yeah, that's the whole like energy that I'm getting, is this Unsullied thing that he wants to do to the entire human race. And I should mention too, how like he continually is struggling against this like smug smile on his face that he knows does not give a good impression, but he wants to like hold it back, but he keeps being unable to do it. This is so funny. Spears inclined his head and try as he might to suppress it. A trace of his superior smile wouldn't leave his face. He sipped his water again and unsuccessfully tried to banish the emotion, but soon gave up on the effort. Why should I? These savages will soon bow to me. They'll need to get used to it. Talk about fucking counting your chickens, dude. Look, he's been at this for thousands of years, and he has gotten people to literally worship him before. So I'm not like entirely mad at his confidence here. But it's just, you know, I wish that we could read the minds of the people in that room, because I can't imagine how many people hate him. It must be insufferable. It's we've made the comparison. Heather's mentioned Tony Stark a couple times, but Tony Stark manages to be simultaneously insufferable and charming. There's like an endearing quality to it. An awareness that makes it feel less like incredibly irritating. And this dude doesn't have that to me. He seems to just be, because Tony has like humor and this guy doesn't seem to have it. There's no humor, takes a certain kind of empathy. That's what makes us laugh, is feeling like somebody gets it. They understand me. And they're saying something that's so true that I relate to. And he isn't like that. So he can't express things in that way. And it just makes him outright shitty. It's remarkable how much humor can get us to like overlook somebody being a dick. Let's see. Heather says, I don't know if you watched The Expanse at all, but there's a character in there that is an artificially induced psychopath. It was completely non-invasive and painless, but irreversible. I have not watched that. That was something that Jamie and I were thinking of covering when I quit Doctor Who and I was going to come back after the wedding and start a new show. And then when I came back, I wound up having this like problem with my blood pressure. Those of you who are not aware, I have been dealing with a lot of like weird health issues that have popped up due to me not taking care of myself at all and working way too much, which should come as no surprise to anybody who knows about the sheer output that I have for my podcast. And so I wasn't able to start the new show with Jamie because I just couldn't add another thing. So it may be in the future, but it's just not going to happen anytime soon. So I have to avoid everything Expanse related because of the potential to eventually cover it. So, all right, I'm taking too much time on this, but like wrapping it up, there's the vibe is we're going to get you this money. We're going to do it, but you just have to wait for it. And we have to do a whole fucking song and dance about how we like talked about it first, even though obviously we're going to fucking cave. So then we go to the rest of the team with Jordan. They're watching Dr. Spears and talking about the implications of this. And it's weird because nobody seems to be like asking the kinds of questions that I want them to. And that's not to say that this doesn't feel true. They're focusing on Dr. Spears's connection with Aftermath, which does make sense. But I am finding it sort of interesting. And we know obviously that Dr. Spears is actually an alien. But if I were them at this point, I think I would be asking if Dr. Spears is awakened. Wouldn't you? Like, we've got this guy who is just apparently a genius running this fucking like $1 billion conglomerate, whatever, with technology that feels so advanced, nobody else can even come close to matching it, finding out things in his research that nobody else has come close to discovering. I would start to be really suspicious of whether or not he was actually just a regular human being, simply because of the fact that he is so interested in the awakening and the concepts behind it. It's such a perfect smokescreen. And then later on, when Jordan finds out that he was like part of the monitoring in the US of their awakened people, it still doesn't really enter her mind. She's still thinking like he's just this scientist with huge connections and money. And there is a connection between him and Aftermath, she's sure, in some way. But it never occurs to her that he's awakened. And I would sort of, if I were going to think that he was awakened, I would maybe guess that he would have a similar power as to what Ryan has. But maybe when it comes to something like on a molecular level, you know, just an ability to like see systems and work with things on almost an atomic level that would enable him to leap ahead in ways that other people can't in his research and his advancement in technologies. So yeah, I found it interesting because they're making the connection between him and Aftermath in a way that I wasn't really expecting. It actually, I think it's Douglas who says something like, maybe the attack on his facility was set up so that we wouldn't look at him, which is like pretty much exactly correct. And everybody else is like, dude, that's just like wild conjecture. Like you're just fully pulling that out of your ass. But if I were going to be brainstorming, I would probably be putting money on the fact that he was awakened and somehow had like gotten an alliance going with Aftermath due to the fact that they were both awakened at the same time, or that they like, he figured out a way to enhance Aftermath's abilities or something like that. But anyway, it's not like so important, but I just found it interesting because, you know, I think that what would happen if this actually occurred and awakening became a thing that we knew had gone on, that we knew that there were people among us who had powers. Would you not begin to wonder if literally everybody was awakened? Like, wouldn't you be so paranoid about it all the time? I feel like this would be the sort of thing that becomes a witch hunt, you know, where you're starting to be like, oh, he's got powers, that's why he can. So I would definitely start looking at it for people who are in particularly powerful positions. I mean, somebody like Regina, where she's got this fucking like mind reading, talk about positioning her, like she could be so dangerous if you wanted to put her in the right place. It's lucky for everybody that she's doing the job that she is, rather than being put somewhere where she could like, you know, get secrets out of folks. So anyway, I just think about that myself, just how completely paranoid I would get about everybody. And of course, everybody's reaction essentially to the idea of awakening all of humanity is like, that sounds like the worst fucking idea I have ever heard. Everybody who wants to like get one up on people who have wronged them is going to be trying to access this. And then somebody's like, well, you know, it wouldn't be available to everybody. And the reply is, oh, cool. So like yet another thing that the rich are going to have to hold over the poor. And I was like, yeah, that sounds right. Like the poor can't even afford healthcare. I don't think any of us are going to qualify for awakening. Not unless we're like part of a fucking like blind study that we just write away our lives for in exchange for like probably something like $8,000, I'm thinking. Cause that's like, if you're a woman who is willing to donate your eggs for money, cause I looked into this when I was like super broke. I was already selling my plasma. So I kind of figured like, why not? You have to be between a certain age, which I no longer was. You have to be under a certain weight, which I definitely was not. And they only pay you something like, I think like $8 or $9,000, which to me was so insulting. Like what you have to go through to donate the eggs in the first place. And donate, obviously, it's in quotes. They use the word donate even though you're getting paid for it, which I found really kind of weird. But you have to go through all of these like hormone injections and this really invasive, like it will feel like you're pregnant in a lot of ways. And this is also true of being a what do you call it when you carry the child for somebody else? It was equally small an amount that you got paid, which considering surrogate, thank you, Heather, considering that pregnancy will permanently alter your body, that's just an unavoidable fact. No amount of money is ever going to be enough. Just out of the gate. But yeah, that's what I would envision. If we were going to do Awakened on anybody, the only poor people who would have access to it would be people willing to take any kind of risk. And probably in a lot of ways, people who just don't have anything else to lose because they, I mean, there is no guarantee if you go through something like this that you're going to get a power that's good. That's any good for you to live with. There's all kinds of, if you go through X-Men, there are so many bad powers that they will either like ruin your quality of life, or they're just like, they can look at like a deformity that makes you stand out in a way that's not desirable for living in the world. Just all kinds of ways that this could go really wrong. We haven't seen, in truth, that many examples of awakened people so far. It's been fairly tame. The only person that we've seen who does something like dramatic in terms of transformation is Tretyak. And I don't know. I feel like we're acting like that's not common. We don't know that it's not common. We just haven't seen it, Yeah, exactly. Heather's saying, imagine getting something like Rogue's power, pre-Miss Marvel absorption. Exactly. You literally cannot touch another person for the rest of your life. Like, this is the sort of thing I'm talking about. You can't go into it knowing what your ability would be. We all hope that we would get something dope, like flying or invisibility or teleportation or whatever. But what if you just get something weird, like your body can turn into water? I guess? Like, what practical application is that? There's not a lot that you can do with that isn't wildly inconvenient or extremely niche specialized in a way that would cause you to change up the entire way you're living your life. There's just, this is what I mean. It's just shit that's like, I just wouldn't risk it personally. I could totally understand why people would, but I think that if you were poor, it would be a lot more of a risk. 'Cause like, you do this and then you still have to like go back to work probably. You still have to like make a living. If you're rich and you get some weird power that makes you look super strange, you're rich. It's fine. You're just now that rich, weird looking person with a superpower. Oh, it's terrible. If you're poor and you're dealing with that shit, what a pain in the ass. Nobody's hiring you. Like, what are you going to do? Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm taking so long. I'm really just getting off track here. So this is when Jordan starts talking about how Aftermath doesn't buy into the metahuman bullshit. She's just like, I don't see it. Like, if he's like mocking people who are unawakened, and she says, what does it get him in the end? Humanity trying to kill every awakened person they can find? Encouraging a race war seems idiotic, and Aftermath is no idiot. Still, I do wonder if there is some connection between the two. There were far better targets to hit in London than Imagine. It may feel like a leap, but the timing of Aftermath's attack and Spears' sudden breakthrough seem a little too convenient. Everyone's scared, and Spears is standing there with his hand out, waiting for money to supposedly create protection for everyone. Now, Aftermath is in Seattle, where Spears has several properties. We need to investigate this. And at some point, somebody's like, maybe it's just a coincidence. And Douglas is like, oh yeah, we definitely deal in coincidence a lot here. So then they start talking about Whip Scorpion, whose name I hate. I've said it before, but I just have to say it again. I can't handle it. And it turns out that he's basically a sadist and really enjoys hunting people. That is like his jam, and he has been open with that in the past. But Jason, he's talking about like the experiences that they had with him. And he said, we thought he was fucking with us. We didn't think he meant it when he said, oh, hunting man, the most dangerous game. And then we found out later, like, he 100% meant every single word of it. And then Jordan is thinking about the alarms that went off in her head when she met Spears. And is like, okay, so if he's working with a guy like this, that definitely makes sense. That I'm not getting a good energy off of the dude because he clearly doesn't have the kind of morals that I would expect from a regular fucking human being. And I mean, honestly, we could just say that about anybody who's like hyper rich. if somebody has an excessive amount of the wealth of the world, there is something wrong with them. And I'm just going to like go on record saying that. If you can hoard wealth the way that people like this would have to, while the rest of the world lives the way it does, there is something wrong with you. You're broken somehow. There's something missing. And you need to like go to therapy and figure that out and give your money away, because like genuinely, what the fuck? And I'm talking about the hyper rich guys. Don't act like, oh, I'm making $150,000 a year. Do you think I'm no. You're making $150 a year, you're middle class. That's middle class right now. Just FYI. So anyway, this is when Jason says Spears has been through our base a few times. And they try and get like, oh, really? You didn't tell us about that. And he's like, oh, really? You haven't told us about a lot of fucking stuff. So maybe don't try and act like, how dare you keep information from us? You're keeping shit from us too. You clearly know something about Aftermath that you're not sharing. So guess what, guys? You can give us some information and maybe get something out of it, but you don't get to play high and mighty with us. And I was like, that's fair. So, okay, that's pretty much that conversation is just like, overall, the connection that they're beginning to make. And then we have this thing with, how do we get in touch with your old team members? Chance question. Maybe they can shed some light on this for us. We don't, FX replied. They're all dead. Jordan's eyebrows rose. How did that happen? And he looks at Jason, and Jason's just sort of like, tell him, I guess. And he says, they were operating in Mexico. We think they got ambushed. There was like one dude who remained, and he didn't remember anything. He said he was nowhere near it, and we have a telepath who read his mind and said that he just didn't have any idea what happened. And he was telling the truth about that. And Lily says, do you trust what your telepath said? And I was like, good girl. You know, you can never like, you have one person whose word you're taking that they're, you know, whatever it is this person is thinking, you really should be sure you can trust that person. And I was glad she pointed that out. So this conversation ends with them wanting to see the reports and look through them. And of course, Jill wants to be part of this. And we have a conversation with Jordan and Jill. And Jason gets a little bit involved at first. Jill wants to be involved. Jordan tells her, no, you have to go and do your homework and focus on your studies. And honestly, it's moments like this that I keep being reminded that Jordan is like too serious. Jordan, lighten up. For reals. Just lighten up. Like, I don't know what that looks like, but sincerely, you need to just chill out a little bit. And understandably, Jill is like, are you fucking high? Did you hear what we were just talking about? And you want me to go to school? No, I'm not doing that. And she makes a couple points about, I probably could see things you guys don't because of all your training. It's going to give you blinders on certain things. And Jason, who's still standing there, is like, she's right, you know. And Jordan is like, do you want to fucking, really? Do you want to get involved in this? And eventually Jill is just like, by the way, I'm 18, so I don't need your permission. So Jason, would you like my help? And then he realizes that he's really been put in this position between them. And he's like, you know what? I'm out. Never mind. Y'all figure it out. And I was like, all right, pussy, if you're going to start some shit and not finish it, that's on you, I guess. And eventually they come to an understanding, and it just like comes down to basically Jill promising that she's like going to ace her test, and Jordan is understandably worried about her. But the thing with Jill is that she's somebody who's just going to do the shit she wants to do anyway. There's a point at which you can't stop somebody like that. You know, this is the sort of thing that would happen all the time in fucking Lost. For those of you who have never seen Lost, basically every episode was, I'm going to go investigate the thing. Let me come with you to investigate the thing. You can't come and investigate the thing. Investigating the thing is too dangerous. You stay here while I go investigate the thing. I don't want to stay here while you investigate the thing. Well, that's too bad. I'm leaving you behind while I go investigate the thing. They walk away, and then the person left behind goes, I'm going to follow them while they investigate the thing. Inevitably, Inevitably. They just fucking follow them because that's always what happens. You can't just tell somebody who's incredibly determined you're not allowed because they're a person and an adult and they get to decide. So then you always have this like, ugh, of course they're here. And now I have to worry about their safety as well. It's just repeated ad nauseum. That show just tired me out after a while. And I think Jordan just kind of realizes that that's like what she's facing with Jill. And maybe there comes a point where you just have to be like, all right, all I can do is like mitigate the potential damage of her involvement in this. I have to figure out a way to work with it, you know, which sometimes it's the best you could do. So yeah, she lets Jill be involved, and Jill and Lily wind up becoming sort of friendly because they're close in ages. Jill at one point tries to be like, oh, I'm too young, but Lily's okay. And Jordan's like, Lily's been training for a year every day of the week, all year long. That's not a comparison you want to make. I was like, that's fair. So then we go to Arkady Malyev. Arkady? I can't remember how I'm supposed to say it. And this dude, I had forgotten that, like, when the last section ended, we were in the midst of him breaking his boss out of the fucking block. And shit isn't going awesome. It's interesting. I can't remember what my feelings were on his plan when he was, like, thinking to himself about the way they were going to do this. But I feel like I had some questions and didn't really understand how he planned to carry certain things out. And he runs into some stuff here that he hadn't really thought through completely. And it's not even, that makes it sound like he was a lot more like rash than he really was. When I say he hadn't thought through, I think it's more, he just didn't have the kind of information he would have needed to know this was going to be an issue. And I believe that he expected certain things to be simpler and hadn't thought about the kinds of like security protocols and restrictions that would be in place at somewhere that has this kind of insane security level, you know? So yeah, he comes in there and he really thinks that they're just going to be able to like bust their guys out of these cryogenic chambers all at once and then fucking move out. And it turns out that one, they need to like defrost for half an hour at minimum to make sure that there's no permanent damage done to the tissues. And secondly, this dude who's like the technician who can work stuff only has clearance to get 2 of these cryogenic pods out at a time. And I found this sort of a little bit hard to follow because he gets the 2 pods out, one of which has Trechek in it, of course. And I couldn't understand if it was just that he was only allowed to have 2 out at a time, or if he was only allowed to take 2 out at a time. Because if it's only that he was allowed to have 2 out, later on I could swear that Arkady says something about how they got all of their brothers out. And if they did that, wouldn't they have had to find a way around this restriction that this guy was working with? I'm just a little bit confused about how this actually went down. It doesn't matter really in the end because they do get through it, but I was kind of pleased to see that this compound is a little bit tougher than he expected it to be. And there are a lot more sort of minor, like, sounding inconveniences that actually throw a giant wrench in his entire plan because their timing has to be pretty tight. They may have, like, the abilities that they do and the element of surprise, but once their element of surprise is gone, even with their abilities, if these people like manage to organize and get them penned in somewhere, enough firepower and their fucking abilities aren't going to be enough. So I was sort of enjoying the fact that he was doing, like, getting frustrated and a little bit freaked out, wondering if he was going to fail actually. Heather says it's limited to 2 at a time. They just stayed until everyone got out, so it was an hours-long slog. Oh, that sucks. Well, good. I'm glad it sucked, because fuck these guys, right? I'm not supposed to be on their side. I shouldn't be sympathetic to them. So, in the end, This is so funny. Tretyak wakes up and grabs Arkady by the throat. And I love that Arkady basically, like, floods. It says, let's see. Arkady filled his scent with contrition, hoping that the non-hostile smell would bring the Crimson Shark's mind into focus. That just was so funny to me. I filled my scent with contrition. I wonder what contrition smells like. What do you think? Try and think of something that's like, it's pleasant, but maybe a little bit heavy because it's laced with guilt, probably. I don't know. I'm thinking like something that's got like cinnamon, but maybe also we've got like sandalwood, something heavy, to bring it down a little bit. I don't know. But anyway, he informs Crimson Shark, who comes out at fucking full capacity. This dude wakes up and is like, what's the situation? Okay, here's what we do. He like fucking is on it immediately. Have Adisa's men bring me 3 of the torpedoes from the submarines. What are you going to do with those? We can't flood the facility with a hull breach. The automatic doors will shut and seal off the breached area. Yes, and the prison staff will be trapped between 2 flooded sections when I detonate the 3rd torpedo and trap them in the flooded area with us. It's time to hunt. And I was like, oh, that is fucking cold-blooded. Yikes. I feel bad for these guys. That's just like, that's a death sentence. That's it. That's all there is to it. Yikes. Also, I should mention too, because he says something here about how, have Adisa's men bring me, and Adisa is mentioned earlier from Arkady's perspective, that Tretyak insisted on adding Adisa to the team because he saw something in him. And Arkady was kind of like, what are you talking about? First of all, this dude isn't even Russian. I think he's African. And Arkady says that anybody who isn't Russian, who's an outsider, he just immediately assumes is going to be weaker than they are. And I really kind of enjoy this. Arkady is hearing from somebody else that Adisa's like fucking killing it out there, literally and figuratively. And he's like, God damn, I was wrong. This is why I'm not fucking Crimson Shark, and I never will be. And there was something about that I found almost like cute. Just the moment of being like, see, this is why I'm not the boss. Fuck. All right. When you're right, you're right. And he realizes that he has to like sort of rethink the way he approaches outsiders being part of things. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of cute. I liked it. So then we go to chapter 16. And I can't believe this. It's I'm almost out of time. Holy shit. I'm sorry, Heather. I've talked about a lot of what happened, but nevertheless, this conversation between Jordan and Brian is so sad. He actually tells her that he's considering getting awakened himself. And even though Jordan is trying to assure him that she likes him how he is, he just doesn't believe her. And this is just one of those things that I just so understand. I really do. I think I said this last time when he was considering this whole thing. I really felt for him because this is just, it's hard enough when your partner just seems out of your league in a really ordinary way. Like you're with somebody who's way hotter than you, for example. That already can sort of make you feel like, what do you see in me? You could be with somebody so much more attractive. I can't understand it. But then you add a superpower into it and like, holy shit. Yeah. And she eventually is like, here are all of the incredible things that you do every day and the projects that you've headed up and managed that I could never do, that are incredibly important and really impressive. And I liked that he seemed to actually hear her finally when she said this. And there are a couple of moments within the conversation where they're like joking in a way that feels like maybe somebody's trying to avoid getting into it, which is very understandable. I have this, of course, anybody in a relationship, especially with somebody who's like witty, they know we can use that to try and disarm the other person and dodge the actual issue. It's a very tempting proposition a lot of the time. And by the end of this, it feels better between the two of them, but it's clearly not like resolved. And she still doesn't know what the deal is with her attraction to Jason. So she's avoiding him at all costs and getting kind of like frustrated at the fact that she doesn't understand what's behind this. Which, yeah, there's nothing like finding yourself out of control for a reason you can't understand. It sucks. And Jordan's a control freak. Like, let's be real. So let's see. Oh, okay. So then we go to Cassidy and McIntyre. And this was sort of McIntyre, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, we have seen a shift in him previously, right? He has been talking to somebody who has like managed to change his energy on a particular issue. I don't recall, unfortunately, the specifics of it. I feel like we aren't shown who it is. But his whole like attitude in dealing with Cassidy here is one of resentment, frustration, placation, and just the sort of like, I'm going to bide my time because I am only going to have to deal with you for like a little longer. And I don't even mean it that dramatically. It's not like, oh, I just have to wait till you die. But there is a sense of like, I just need to get this guy to back off for right now. And he just doesn't really respect Cassidy in this section. He thinks that Cassidy's concern for his daughters and stuff is an indication of weakness. And it's just sort of sad. I didn't like seeing this contention between the two of them. And it's because of Crimson Shark's escape, and Cassidy's worried about his daughter, and he wants to be involved, and eventually McIntyre has to be like, you are not going to be involved, and I'm not asking you not to be involved. I am telling you you are not involved because I'm in charge and you aren't. That's not happening. So just so you know, that's the way this is laid out. And Cassidy gets kind of like angry about it, but also backs down a little and recognizes like the pragmatism behind that. Heather says it's not that someone has been talking or influencing him. It's that he's obsessed with bringing down Aftermath at all costs. Okay. I feel like wasn't there a scene where he's like talking to somebody who's sitting in the corner and we can't see who it is? Or maybe I'm getting him mixed up with another character. I could swear that there's been like an ongoing connection between somebody and like a shadowy, mysterious figure that we haven't gotten to meet. I might be wrong on this though. But yeah, so this whole thing is just sort of these two who have had a decent relationship, and it begins to sort of fall apart here. Oh, okay. Heather says one of the other Incarna warned him about using the sisters. Oh, okay. Got you. So at this point, it ends with, your daughter needs to realize we're in a dangerous game here. Don't you think it's time for her to learn the truth? And your wife also thinks so. And it hadn't even occurred to me that like, you're going to be considering telling her about the truth of where she comes from. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I don't know why it never occurred to me, but crucial. Definitely do that. And appropriately, this is when we go to Dr. Linden. And him and Reggie are just joking around a little bit. She takes off to go and have a break, a 4-hour-long break. And Linden is left by himself to think about his own fucking mistakes, which are quite significant, actually. He essentially is like, I am the reason that Spears has gotten as powerful as he is and is now in the position that he is. He has ruled over humanity repeatedly, demonstrated that he has no respect for humanity, given them multiple weapons of war over the course of history. And I have literally done nothing to stop him. So all of this now is on me. I have to tell Jordan. And I was like, holy shit. So we're going to have two people trying to like break the news to her. And I really wonder how that's going to go, because if he teamed up with Cassidy and the two of them approached her together, maybe that would work better. But if he tells her before her dad does, like, her dad can say all he wants. I was going to tell you. I was coming down here to tell you. I don't know that I would believe him. I would just be like, yeah, sure you were. You know, I don't know. I feel like this could go really badly. So Ryan comes in here and he questions her a little bit, trying to figure out what the vibe is that people are getting off of Spears. And she's like circumspect up to a point, and then finally starts to be like, he's a fucking creep. I don't like him. Nobody likes him. Like, my sister hates him. And he flirted with her right in front of her husband, and I would have fucking punched his face in. Like, sincerely, I do not like the guy. And I sort of enjoyed this, Lyndon just like getting more and more delighted at the fact that this dude is not fooling these women, at least. That's one of those things. Do you guys have to have had this thing where you're like, not sure if somebody hates a person as much as you do, and you have to pull out these like little feelers that are very cautious in case they like them. And then when they come back with, oh, that fucking bitch. And you're just like, oh, thank God, you know, it's just such a relief. So yeah, he has figured out that Spears has probably gotten some of Jordan's DNA, and he takes some of Ryan's DNA. When he holds her hand, he's got like a little thing on this ring that he activates. And I was like, I don't like this. What are you doing? I don't, like, I'm sure he's doing a good thing with it, but I just wish, like, can you just get consent, please? Can you just, you know? And then this section, this chapter ends with Jill and Lily going out to shop and Jordan talking with Douglas a little bit. And he can tell something's wrong. And she asks whether or not they can, like, hang out together. And he says, I think you need to go and hang out with your husband because things are clearly not great between you two. I can see it. So you should probably deal with that. And he also, like, asks her to open up to him a little. And she rightfully is like, guy, it takes two. So you could tell me about Aftermath. And he essentially says that he will tell her, but it's a really long story. And I don't want to get into it right now. But he killed friends and family. Back in those days, we were close, and he just destroyed that and destroyed all the trust that we had in each other. And that's about all he says. So it ends with her telling him to have fun. He's going out on a date with her sister. Hey. All right. I have to wrap up. I'm over time. But thank you very much to Heather for commissioning this. Sorry for going over. I always do. I talk too much. I hope you guys are enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.